Welcome to the Michigan College Access Network's Education Highlights in the Fiscal Year 25 State Budget presentation today. I'm Ryan Fewins-Bliss, the Executive Director. I am excited to talk to you about the budget that the legislature passed and the governor signed. Remember that when I'm talking about fiscal year 25, that begins October 1st of 24 and goes through September 30th of 2025. That's helpful to keep in mind. We are still in the fiscal year 24 timeframe that will end on September 30th. If you have questions for me or others at any time, there's a Q&A button down on your lower panel. Feel free to click that button, put your question in. If we can answer it live in the webinar, we'll do so. If not, we'll follow up with the information that you're looking for. Excited to have a large group here interested in talking about the state budget. At the end of the webinar, we will have a resource for you to use when talking about the budget. Some of you may have already seen it. It's sort of our one-pager on how the budget turned out throughout the process. But if you haven't seen that yet, you'll get that at the end in the chat function. All right, let's get started. So big overview on the budget this year. We were pretty much on track like normal. The governor put out her introductory budget or recommended budget in February. The Senate and the House followed up in April and May. They worked through the process. Things seemed to be moving along very well. But then at the very end, things seemed to start to fracture for the Democrats and some of their partners, especially education partners. There was some argument or some strategy, I guess, around how to use some large pots of money in the state and using that as leverage for other things. So at the end of June, there was heavy pressure from education groups and other groups. It actually looked like it might push the budget past their self-imposed July 1 deadline, but it turned out that they came up with a compromise. Will you go to the next slide for me, please? Thank you. So the end product was, the budget was finalized on time, but there were some really big unexpected changes that I will say rocked several sectors, including ours in higher ed and K-12 education. I like to say many people across Lansing and the state were saying, huh? When the dust settled, it doesn't appear that anybody is super happy with the final product, but maybe that's what compromise is. Maybe that means it's a good budget. I know the legislature is very proud of it, as is the governor's office. There is some victories in this for our field, many victories, in fact, including free community college, something we were all working to get across the finish line. That's known as the Community College Guarantee. You'll see that later in the presentation. So let's talk about specific things for access and success. We could be here all day if we dug into the budget and talked about all things K-12, all things higher ed. What we've tried to do is grab the things for our field and Michigan College Access Network in across the state to highlight those things. So you're not going to see the entirety of the budget here, I want to say. So let's first talk about that community college guarantee. Big win for community colleges, big win for students and families. $30 million was added to the post-secondary scholarship fund, which is sort of the vessel for the Michigan Achievement Scholarship, which includes funding for the community college guarantee. There is a lot of chatter about the community college guarantee being paid for with school aid funds, maybe some of the saved funds from retirement from K-12 this year. And I want to make sure everyone knows that's not true. That is general fund dollars going into the community college guarantee. We didn't trade one piece of education for another. This is from general fund. This is an investment from the legislature and the governor. So hopefully that's helpful. So along with this free community college, if you live in district to a community college, you can get a $1,000 additional award if you are Pell eligible. That can go to support cost of attendance things, transportation, food, childcare, housing, all the things we know are other barriers to students. So that's a big win, community college guarantee as a whole, and then certainly this $1,000, what they're currently calling a bonus for those that are Pell eligible. So win for our field on that part. Let's talk about the Michigan Achievement Scholarship in general. That is the vehicle for the community college guarantee. So that $30 million into the Michigan Achievement Scholarship brings the total budget to $330 million annually. We're hoping that we'll get to the planned for $560 million over the course of 5 years. we will encourage the legislature to follow through on that promise. The maximum award for public university students remains $5,500, but the maximum award for private college students increases from $4,000 to $5,500. So now there's sort of parity between public university and private institutions. The program does change so that it includes coverage of cost of attendance, not just tuition and fees. So as I said, with the community college guarantee, $1,000 bonus, this can cover things like housing, transportation, childcare, food, the things that are other barriers for students. So we're excited about that. We're excited about the expansion. Those things are big wins for students and families. Let's talk about Michigan Reconnect, something we also love. Funding for Michigan Reconnect continued this year at 52, and when I say this year, I mean next fiscal year, to be clear. The funding continued at $52 million, and the program was transferred to the new MyLeap department from the Labor and Economic Opportunity, or LEO department, to better align with the governor's vision for this new department and what they will manage. There has been an age reduction in place for some time now, from 25 to 21. That's currently scheduled to end December 31st, 2024, with fall 2024 being the last semester to begin enrollment. So students can get in this semester that's starting now, and that means they will kick in for being Reconnect eligible for their entire college career. We're hoping to get more folks into that 21 still. Students can turn 21 by December 31st, 2024 and still be in, but they've got to be registered for this semester as it currently stands. I know MyLeap was talking about some other opportunities. You may have seen some emails about that. We're encouraging folks to actually permanently make it 21 to 21 and above, but that hasn't happened yet. So we'll be working on that as part of our legislative strategy, but there may be an extension here in the coming months for the 21 reduction in its current form. On the next slide, we go to the tuition incentive program. If you're familiar with the TIP program, they increased the program by $20 million in fiscal year 25 due to its extensive use. So that's really exciting. That means people are using the TIP program. Our friends at My Student Aid in the MyLeap department now have done some incredible work over the last few years to make the TIP program more easily accessible to students. As you know, this is sort of a convoluted formula that folks have to come up with about being on Medicaid for a certain number of months within a certain amount of time. It's hard for students and families to navigate that, but we've done away with the application. We now have the FAFSA as the application, so that money is more easily accessible, which is part of why I think we've seen the increased program uptake. The budget also replaces the TANF funds, the federal funds that were being used to offset the costs of the tuition incentive program. We believe that the federal government is expected to disallow those funds to be used for college scholarships. We are one of many states that we're doing that. We're really excited that the state is working ahead of the game here. Before the feds say that we can't use that money, they've replaced it so that won't upend financial aid in Michigan. So kudos to the legislature and the governor for that foresight. One of the losses we have this year is the Michigan tuition grant. So the fiscal year 25 reduces the Michigan tuition grant by about $500,000 and states that the program is intended to be phased out over time. If you're familiar with the MTG, this is the opportunity for students of need going to a private college in the state. We would love to have this come back. We sort of fought for it this year. But whatever wisdom the legislature and the governor is using, they've decided to phase it out. I don't think the argument about this is done yet. We're going to keep pushing for this to be reinstated, at least in some form. So no new students will be awarded starting this fall. We also were using TANF funds here, and the legislature and the governor replaced those funds here. So as you can see on the screen, this is a loss for private colleges, students in need, and adult students. We sort of leave a bucket of students out here, even though the Michigan tuition grant was increased in the maximum for independent college students. there's still some students who aren't going to be eligible. So we don't want to see less financial aid in the state. We want to see more financial aid, and we don't want to leave any population out. So that is part of our legislative agenda in the future. I'm sure you all remember the Michigan Competitive Scholarship, like the Michigan Tuition Grant that was phased out, is in the process of being phased out, but that was done a year ago. Again, in honor of the Michigan Achievement Scholarship, it seemed repetitive to the state to have two scholarships like this. Again, we are not thrilled at having less financial aid in the state, but it's a hard argument to make when the legislature is investing hundreds of millions of new dollars into financial aid. They are investing more. So the argument that they're investing less sort of falls on deaf ears, because it's hard to wrap your head around in a specificity of the type of scholarship. I read the legislature and the governor's office at moving toward one bucket of financial aid, which makes it easier for students and families to navigate. The problem with having just one bucket is if a future legislature or a future governor wanted to take it away, it's real easy to knock over one bucket instead of the multiple buckets we have now. So there's pros and cons of both approaches. The money that is being used still on the competitive scholarship also replaced in the TANF funds by funds from the state. Michigan Promise Zones, we've got 13 active zones all across the state right now. This funding is functionally a pass-through. If you're familiar with how the Promise Zones work, they use tax increment financing at the local level to capture growth in the state education tax. That money then stays local for scholarships and other supports for students. I'm excited to say that the budget in fiscal year 25 for all of the Promise Zones together is $8.5 million. In light of the community college guarantee, I know our friends at the Michigan Promise Zones across the state are rethinking their scholarship. What does that need to look like? What does it need to pay for? So that students can get more on top of the community college guarantee. So we're excited to see what they come up with over the next year. But this is the most money that has been allocated to the Michigan Promise Zones ever in the budget. So we know it's just going to keep growing from here as long as the economy stays on the pace that it's on. So we're excited for them. Let's talk about the FAFSA completion challenge. One of the buckets of money that we fought for in the last budget, the current budget that we're in, was $10 million that would go to schools to incentivize FAFSA completion. So the state, through the Michigan Department of Education, put that into place, put it into operation. I think there's something like 400 or 500 schools across the state that got $50 per senior student back last fall, and they're about to get a payment of $50 per student that completed the FAFSA this fall. That's how the MDE used that money this year. For the next year, though, there's been a change. The money is going only toward districts, schools that have adopted a universal FAFSA policy. So you probably all know we at MCAN have been pushing for universal FAFSA as a policy, as a law at the state level. That has not moved through yet. That bill has only passed the Senate and not the House. But through the lens of the budget in fiscal year 25, they will be supporting districts that have sort of self-adopted a universal FAFSA policy. There's probably some creativity in this that we can find and support our districts on. It doesn't have to be as formal as what we expect the universal FAFSA policy to be should it pass by law. So we're excited to see what local districts come up with themselves. That's $10 million in the budget for that, divided among the districts who adopt some sort of requirement to fill out the FAFSA as part of graduation. This was moved from the Michigan Department of Education to MyLeap, again, to move toward the governor's vision of what this new department will be about. And as I mentioned, those second payments for the last year, the current year, fiscal year 24 grantees, we expect to be made in the next month. So let's talk about operational funding for our higher ed friends. That's something that MCAN cares deeply about, as we know our higher ed friends do. This was one of the surprising areas, that the increase in operational funding for both community colleges and public universities was less than it was in any of the three budgets that were negotiated. That's pretty unusual to have things go down if the three budgets are sort of in agreement about moving up. I think this is part of the internal machinations of what was being negotiated. Luckily, it is still an increase. After years and years of decreases, we're still seeing new increases, which is helpful. So ultimately, for community colleges, there's a 2.5% increase. That comes with a 4.5% tuition restraint, meaning institutions cannot raise their tuition higher than 4.5%, or they'll be ineligible for the operational funding increases this year. It also requires institutional best practices, which is new this year. That increase is divided up into a 1.5 increase for operational funding period and a 1% increase if an institution adopts the best practices that are recommended in the budget. One of those is increasing and improving transfer processes. Looks the same for our friends in public universities, a 2.5% increase, a 4.5% tuition restraint. There is that divide in the institutional best practices again, 1.5% on operational funding, 1% for institutional best practices. Again, on the university side, it also includes improving the transfer processes. Let's talk about that best practice funding. Here's what the new law through the budget says. The 1% of operations increases for colleges, and this is community colleges and public universities, that number one, participate in transfer activity. And the budget has laid out, it's like 4 or 5 different things when it says participating in transfer activity that they're talking about. Many institutions are already doing some or all of those things, but I like that the budget is being used to say, hey, we want to, as a state, improve transfer, make it as easy as possible and incentivize it for students. The Michigan Achievement Scholarship already does that. So I think this is a win for the field. I know our friends in institutions probably have a little bit of heartburn about being required to do certain things to get more operational increases, and I definitely understand that perspective. And then you have to do at least one of the things that you see on the bottom there. Academic degree mapping, which is having the course schedule and the course pathway mapped out for students before they step foot into a program. We know that that is helpful as a best practice. There's a requirement for a reduced cost for non-credit bearing remedial or developmental courses. Functionally, this is trying to get the colleges to stop doing remedial education and use one of the various strategies like co-requisite to get students to be where they need to be academically. That reduced cost could help students, but ultimately this is incentive to get rid of those courses. Academic advising each semester, every student on campus seeing some sort of academic advisor each semester. We know that that has a high probability of support for students, a high probability of persistence and completion. If some adult with some training puts their hands and eyes metaphorically on a student each semester and offers them some support to make sure they're on the right track. And then finally, one of the options is to provide support during the business day for FAFSA completion. Are there employees of the college that are being allowed to do FAFSA completion and FAFSA support during the business day? I think most of our colleges, both community colleges and public universities, are probably already doing that one alone. The law says they only have to pick one of those. We would love them to take on all 4. But at this point, it's transfer activity and one of the 4 that you see on the bottom of the screen. Let's talk about operational funding for our K-12 partners. We know that higher education, post-secondary education doesn't happen without folks coming out of K-12 well. This is definitely one of the places that has sparked some ire across the state. There is a 0% foundation allowance increase, which means that they're maintaining the base of $9,608 per pupil. But they also have done a one-time investment of almost $600 million spread across the various entities that would reduce retirement contributions. That's a small win, but it's a one-time win. This is one of the places where there was some consternation about how the money is given, where the money is given, the amount of money that's given. I know K-12 as a whole is not very happy with what came out of this. It's sort of unheard of to have a 0% foundation allowance, but our friends in the legislature and the governor's office are saying, Sure, there's a 0% foundation allowance bump, but you are getting more money over here on another side. What I have seen some legislators do is publish what each of their schools in their district are actually getting in cash to support this retirement contribution deferral or reduction, I guess. Uh, I think that's really smart. On the political side, it does communicate that there is money going to school, but not the way that it is traditionally done, and not in the sort of looseness in that a board and superintendent at a district could choose how to use that money. We all know that that's where operational dollars really count, both at the K-12 and the higher education level, where folks have the ability on campus and in districts to make decisions about where that money goes. So this is a piece that we will, I imagine, still be hearing about come fall at the end of this legislative term.
Hey Ryan, before we move on to appropriation and other notable budget items, there's just a couple of questions in here that I would love to get your answer to.
Yeah.
So Lisa has asked, and I actually have an answer to this one. Lisa's asked about posters available for the community college guarantee. We don't have posters, Lisa. We do have a one pager, and then MyLeap also has some additional support surrounding messaging for that. We will drop all of those things in the chat before the end of the webinar so that you're able to access those. And then Ryan, this one is for you. Lisa has another question. If a student qualifies for TIP and community college guarantee, how does that work? Are funds provided up to full cost of attendance and no more? Or will a student potentially receive money after the COA is met?
Great question, Lisa. I don't want to spend a ton of time on packaging because that's a whole nother webinar, but we've got some resources we'll share. Afterward, we'll send out the packaging guidance from the state. TIP would come before the community college guarantee. And so if TIP reduces your tuition and fees down to zero, you wouldn't get anything from the community college guarantee because you don't have any tuition and fee needs. But most likely, if you are TIP eligible, you are Pell eligible, which means you would get the $1,000 cost of attendance bonus payment. That is refundable to students to use for the things that I described earlier. But the community college guarantee plus any other support will not end up funding students over their cost of attendance, which is unlikely to happen, but that is a guidance from the state. They won't pay more than the cost of attendance.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. Just a couple more. Jill has asked, when will the new FAFSA challenge grant open for high schools? Is there a deadline to have the FAFSA graduation requirement in place?
Great question, Jill. I don't have any answers on that. I'm not even sure that MyLeap has started thinking about that. Well, that's probably unfair. I'm sure they've started thinking about that. I don't think they've put anything into practice yet. But if you know us, you know we will try to work with our friends over at MyLeap to advise them on that process. It is not out yet. We will be looking for those details very soon.
And then the last one also from Jill. Thanks, Ryan. Do we have a list or a rating of colleges who are doing some of these best practices like transfer activity, degree mapping, FAFSA support that we can share with others for inspiration or connection?
No, I don't know that a list like that exists because these best practices are new. Putting them together is sort of a new thing for the state. Once each institution returns their reporting form to the state, those are obviously public information. So we should have more ideas about what institutions are saying, yes, we're doing the transfer piece in one of the four below. I would guess that institutions that are doing more than one of the four would click off more than one bucket, and then we would know more about who's doing what at this point. Our staff here at MCAN, Jamie Story, and her staff in the Higher Education Innovation Department has a real good sense of what's happening around the state, but I can't say that it's in one pager in the way that I think you're describing it.
Okay. We've got two more here. So Laura has asked, just verifying that this money didn't come from the CTE funds. That was a conversation that I overheard.
I'm guessing she's talking about the community college guarantee funds, and no, nothing came from CTE. CTE is also sitting in the school aid fund, and no school aid dollars were used or changed or transferred to pay for the community college guarantee.
Great, thank you for that. And then last one, I've got Nicole here. Nicole, you can go ahead and unmute and ask your question. I saw your hand go up. Maybe it was an accident. So if you still have that question later, Nicole, we can get to it at the end of the webinar. But for now, we're going to move on to appropriation and some other notable budget items. I will kick it over back to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Maura. Thanks for all your questions too. Keep them coming. So obviously we care deeply about the MCAN appropriation that is in the budget. We are proud to say that the budget is funding MCAN at $4 million for fiscal year 25. That's a reduction of $1 million from the current fiscal year 24, but ultimately an increase from the fiscal year before that was at $3 million. So we're very thankful for the legislature and the governor to continue to see the importance of funding MCAN. Ultimately, the grants that we send out to all of you, the materials we send out to all of you, is funded by this state appropriation and other philanthropic support. So very happy to have the support of the legislature and the governor still. Some other notable budget items, the Michigan Center for Adult College Success, which sits over on the west side with our Talent First friends, got an appropriation of just over 1.8 million. We were happy to see that. We love working with them. We always care deeply about our tribal colleges. There are increases for all 3 tribal colleges, as I believe all 3 of them have increasing enrollment. We're really excited about that. Our friends at BMCC, KBOCC, and SCTC, we're proud of the work that they're doing. There's a couple of campuses that are getting some funds to test out the hunger-free campus work. And as we think about basic needs and the supports, again, that students need beyond tuition and fees, I'm excited to see how this work comes out. There's $500,000 for MSU and for Northern Michigan University. And then our friends at Teach for America, obviously we care deeply about K-12, but also we care deeply about our AmeriCorps partners, and Teach for America is in our AmeriCorps family. They got $5 million in the budget this year, and we're excited for them to continue to do the great work that they've been doing. Unfortunately, our friends at Launch Michigan were unfunded. There was a small ask in the budget that did not make it through in the conference committee. We're disappointed by that. Hopefully, Launch will be able to get some funding in the future from the state. We know that their reform work is really important. The budget also provides for functionally a build out of the MyLeap department, including a transfer person and a FAFSA person. Again, really excited about the opportunities that MyLeap are bringing to the state. Really love the governor's vision of bringing it all under one heading, and really love that they're investing more in both transfer and FAFSA completion. Over at the Michigan Department of Corrections, they do some great things educating incarcerated individuals across the state. There's $500,000 for expansion of 4-year colleges to increase support for bachelor's degrees for incarcerated individuals. So we're very, very supportive of that. We took a tour of one of the prisons last year that does an incredible job at educating their population, and heard that there's 3,000 people incarcerated in Michigan that are on a wait list for doing some educational programming. So that's a great opportunity. We know that recidivism for those who finish a certificate or a degree while incarcerated it just plummets down. So we know that that is something that works. So we love working with the Michigan Department of Corrections to increase the number of incarcerated individuals who can get some education and come out ready to join the workforce once they re-enter society. And finally, our friends at the Michigan Education Corps also got $5 million. Again, they're a partner AmeriCorps program doing important work in K-12 in communities across the state. So we're excited to see wins for our AmeriCorps brothers and sisters. I think that brings us to the end. So happy to take other questions about this budget. Again, there's thousands of other things that were in the budget, hundreds of other pieces that were education related, but specific to the MCAN field around college access and success. These are the highlights we want you to know. We're really excited about what's going to happen in fiscal year 25. And then as we enter fiscal year 25, we'll start talking about working on fiscal year 26. It's this ongoing cycle. So as we enter fiscal year 25, we'll be starting to brainstorm what are our legislative priorities, for the new legislature after the election, and what are our budget priorities. Happy to hear your feedback now or later on any of those things and what we should include. Do we have more questions?
Yeah, we do. So, one, Carrie, the question we've all been wondering, will we have access to this presentation after the webinar?
Yes, of course.
Great. We will make sure to send that out to everybody that registered and is here today. Another one from Laura came in. Ryan, how do you see the community college guarantee affecting the early college programs in our state?
I don't think it will affect it much because the funding for the early college programs, if you're talking about like early middle college programs, is coming from a different pot of money. I think when students leave their early college, hopefully they're having a certificate or an associate's degree and could move right into using the Michigan Achievement Scholarship if they're financially eligible at a four-year institution. But if they still had credits that they needed to complete at the community college, they could pick up the guarantee at that point.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. I think we've gotten to most of our questions. Nicole, you'd raised your hand earlier. If you do have something, you're welcome to unmute and ask it now. If others have questions, you can drop it in the chat. You can type it into the Q&A or raise your hand. We'll give another couple minutes for some of these other questions to come in. In the meantime, regarding the Michigan Achievement Scholarship, there are additional resources from My Student Aid dropped in the chat for everybody to see. And then we are also working on getting that one pager with more information about that for your use. And we will drop that in the chat as well. Ryan, we do have one coming in from Jill. She has said, I'm excited to see the switch to cost of attendance model for the scholarships. Is there someone in particular that is a championship a champion for that? Excuse me. I'm interested in learning more about that and seeing how to advocate for it in other scholarships.
Yeah, I think MCAN is certainly a champion for that. The Michigan Community College Association is a champion for that. The associations for the public and independent colleges certainly want to support that. I think everybody understands that the barriers to students are more than tuition and fees. Even if when you ask students why they don't go or the thing they're most concerned about, they say the cost. They're talking about tuition and fees. They haven't probably even thought about the other things that need to happen to keep students in and propel them to graduation. So external to the government, those entities are certainly cheerleading that. But there are several legislators that care deeply about this. Representative Steckloff, who's the chair of the Community College and Higher Ed Appropriations Subcommittee, is every time I talk to Representative Steckloff, she talks about cost of attendance. She's a former financial aid staffer in a college here in Michigan, so she understands that well. And I would certainly say on the Senate side, the chair there, Senator McCann from the Kalamazoo area, also cares deeply about that. And, I can't say this enough, having Senator Sarah Anthony sitting at the lead of the Appropriations Committee in the Senate is a gift for us. She worked for MCAN for 8 years as one of our founding staff members. She gets this work probably the best out of most people in the legislature. So she continues to advocate for this. On the governor's side, her education staff also see the need for this and are being supportive as well. I'm also excited to see that we have moved into that. Obviously, paying for cost of attendance is much more costly. But if we're serious about 60 by 30, we're serious about some of our priority populations for MCAN, that's students of color, low-income students, first-generation college-going students. We know these are the other things that matter. And if we don't tackle these as a community locally, as a state, and often as a country, we will have fewer people go to and stay in and succeed in college. So excited that the state is investing this way. And I'm hoping as long as the economy continues to move and grow, that we'll continue to see more investments in this way.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. I am not seeing any more questions coming up in our Q&A or in the chat. I think we're happy to hang out for another couple of minutes because we have a little bit longer on this webinar left in case others have questions. Again, please look in your email for a follow-up with resources that we shared today, as well as additional resources that we're happy to put together, including the information in this presentation. And Ryan has dropped his email in the chat. You're welcome to reach out to him anytime. And yeah, Ryan, is there anything else that you want to go over or cover or say to our folks here?
Yeah, I would just say we're not done with the year yet. There's always talk of a supplemental budget bill at the end of the year. I anticipate we'll see that. What's in it, though? I think everyone who was not in the budget the way they wanted to be in the budget has dreams of being in the supplemental budget bill. So obviously, it can't fund everybody and everything. So there is at least one opportunity probably to take another bite at this apple. But then again, we start to think about fiscal year 26. So I'm most interested in hearing from all of you on what are your priorities? How can MCAN raise those priorities as we do our legislative work? We will issue policy thoughts. We will put out recommendations. We will go and meet with the legislature. We'll go and meet with the governor's office. That's something we do every year. I would love to have your voice. I would love to have your stories. I would love to take that with us. It makes our advocacy even better because if we're not advocating for the things that you all need in the field, there's a disconnect in our mission and we want to correct that. So feel free to call me, feel free to email me, text me, however you want to get a hold of me with those thoughts. I would love to take that with me as we start advocacy for next year and beyond. With that,
We did have one.
I see a few other questions. Go ahead, Maura.
Yeah, we had one more come through from Anne. Do you have any updates on the universal FAFSA legislation?
Yes and no, Anne. Yes, it is alive, and yes, it is sitting in the House waiting for discussion and debate and maybe a vote. No is in that I don't know that it's going to move the rest of this year. Obviously, we're running out of time. The legislature is not in session for a while. Everything's about the election in November. Whatever happens in November, specifically to Michigan's House, will affect what happens in the last, 6-ish, 7-ish weeks before the end of the year and the legislature switch over. So I think a lot of it is going to depend on what happens on election day. Hopefully you all are registered to vote and will get out and vote for the things you care about. And, for us, it's vote for the people who we think are going to be best for education in the state. And I'll let you decide which candidates that is. So, no new movement. It's not dead. We have hopes. We'll keep pushing it. But not much is going to happen between now and the end of the year.
Thanks for that update, Ryan. A really great question from Lisa on trade schools, like, for example, a cosmetology school. Do you have any tips for funding for students in these areas because they are not programs offered at community colleges or four-year universities?
Yes, so many of our scholarships have a skills scholarship side of it that would go to institutions that are not 2-year or 4-year colleges, are not recognized in that way by the federal government. And I think they're pretty popular. Obviously, they don't result in a certificate or a degree, or most of them don't. And so they're not exactly on MCAN's radar in the same way. But I've heard good things from our friends at Labor and Economic Opportunity and MyLeap that those skills scholarships are moving quickly. So there are scholarships available for folks that are going into skilled trades used in a broader sense than just thinking about construction and welding. Cosmetology could certainly be considered that as well. So there are opportunities that the state's investing for those students.
Thank you. And our colleague Janine just shared a bit more information on the My Student Aid website on those skills scholarships. That is in the chat as well as a resource for you. All right. I don't see anything else coming through, so I think we're good to wrap this up. Thanks everybody for being here. We appreciate it. Ryan's email is in the chat. Feel free to reach out anytime, and we look forward to seeing you guys hopefully in November at the conference. And we will be sending an email with some of these resources shared today, as well as additional ones for you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Maura, for your help today. Great to talk to some of you, and hopefully we'll stay in touch about these issues. Have a great week.